Have you ever witnessed a night where everything seemed perfect, until a glass of wine revealed the truth? Today I'm going to tell you how a silent gesture shattered masks that had taken decades to form. Believe me, what seemed like just another luxury event ended up becoming a family battlefield. And in the end, perhaps you too will discover that true strength resides where no one expects it. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing, the London night shone with that characteristic luminosity of grand corporate celebrations, when the dark city sky blends with the reflection of spotlights illuminating the skyscrapers of Canary Wharf, the financial district. The Grand Regent Hotel, located on Park Lane, was unrecognizable that Friday. Its spacious event rooms had been transformed into a true palace of crystal and light, where every detail had been meticulously planned to convey power, elegance, and sophistication. It was the night the Atherton Smith Group would celebrate the most important deal in its history, the billion-dollar merger with the European multinational Bergman Industries, a business that would place the British company at the top of the European technology and infrastructure market. Helena Atherton Smith observed the ballroom from the top of the marble staircase, her delicate fingers holding the champagne flute with an elegance that seemed rehearsed for decades. At 63, Helena maintained an upright posture, her grey hair perfectly styled in an impeccable bun, and she wore a navy blue dress that cost more than many imported cars. Her eyes, cold as ice, scanned every guest, every journalist, every executive present. Everything had to be perfect. Everything had to reflect what she had built over 4 decades of hard work, sacrifices, and decisions few would have. The courage to make. By her side, discreetly positioned 2 steps below, was her son Marcus Atherton Smith. At 41, Marcus carried the weight of the surname like someone bearing a crown they never asked to wear. Tall, broad-shouldered, with neatly cut dark hair, he wore an impeccable tuxedo and maintained the political smile he had learned from his mother. But those who knew him well could read between the lines of that smile. There was a divided man, a man who had never been able to say no to the woman who had raised him alone after his father's premature passing. And then there was she, Lauren Miller Atherton Smith. At 36, Lauren represented everything Helena despised: humble origins, a rise through her own merit, sharp intelligence that didn't need surnames to validate itself. She stood there, beside her husband, wearing a simple yet elegant cream-colored dress, her brown hair loose over her shoulders, a discreet pearl necklace that had been a wedding gift from a distant aunt. Lauren didn't wear ostentatious jewelry. She didn't need to. Her presence had its own weight, a silent dignity that deeply bothered her mother-in-law. What no one in that ballroom knew, except for a few lawyers and the company's restricted board, was that Lauren was not just the heir's wife. She was, in fact, the mind behind that entire deal. With a degree in engineering from the University of London and a master's in business administration from the London School of Economics, LSE, Lauren had joined the Atherton Smith Group as an external consultant 7 years prior. Her work in corporate restructuring was so brilliant that it caught the attention not only of Marcus, with whom she began a relationship that culminated in marriage, but also of international investors who began to see her as the true strategic force of the company. What Helena had never imagined was that, through a series of legal maneuvers absolutely within the law, Lauren had acquired significant shareholdings in the company over the years, using her own resources and agreements with investment funds that believed in her vision. Discreetly, without fanfare, without confrontation, Lauren had become the largest individual shareholder of the Atherton Smith Group. But this was a secret she guarded like a silent trump card, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. The celebration had begun 2 hours ago. The ballroom was filled with well-known faces of the London business elite, influential politicians, specialized media journalists, and executives from various countries. The tables were decorated with floral arrangements that cost small fortunes, and the dinner served was a gastronomic experience crafted by a renowned chef. Everything proceeded as expected. Conversations flowed between toasts and calculated smiles, that kind of social interaction that characterizes the corporate world, where every handshake can mean millions in future business. Lauren tried to maintain her composure, although she knew that Helena's glances throughout the night were like sharp blades. Her mother-in-law had never hidden her disapproval of the marriage. For Helena, Lauren was an intruder, an opportunist who had seduced her son with cheap charm and excessive ambitions. The fact that Lauren was an extremely competent professional only worsened the situation, as it meant she was not just a sentimental threat, but also a threat to the absolute control Helena exercised over the family empire. Marcus, for his part, lived in a constant state of tension. He loved his wife, admired her intelligence, respected her achievements, but the fear of displeasing his mother was a shadow that haunted him since childhood. Helena had raised Marcus with an iron fist after being widowed early, molding him to be the perfect successor to the empire she herself had expanded. And Marcus, despite all his diplomas and experience, had never managed to free himself from that emotional programming that transformed him into an obedient boy whenever he was in his mother's presence. The crucial moment of the night was approaching. The representatives of Bergman Industries had already taken the stage set up at the back of the ballroom, and journalists were positioning their cameras. It was time for the official speech and the symbolic signing of the contract that would be formalized in the following days. Helena descended the staircase with the solemnity of a queen, followed by Marcus and Lauren. The trio positioned themselves before the cameras, and flashes began to erupt like silent fireworks. The president of Bergman Industries, a grey-haired German man named Kurt Schmidt, delivered a brief and objective speech praising the partnership and the potential of the European market. Helena responded with her prepared speech, talking about legacy, tradition, and the promising future that was unfolding. Her voice was firm, controlled, every word chosen to convey authority. She barely looked at Lauren throughout her speech, as if her daughter-in-law was merely an extra in that scene. But then something unexpected happened. One of the journalists, more attuned to corporate backstage dealings, raised his hand and asked Lauren a direct question. "Mrs. Atherton-Smith, how do you evaluate your participation in structuring this deal? There are rumors that you were instrumental in the technical negotiations." The silence that followed was tense. Helena slowly turned to Lauren, her eyes burning with contained fury. Marcus swallowed hard, paralyzed between his mother and his wife. Lauren, for her part, remained calm. In a soft but firm voice, she replied, "It was a team effort, as it always is in large projects. I had the honor of contributing with the technical and strategic part, but the credit goes to the entire Atherton-Smith Group team." The answer was diplomatically perfect, but for Helena, it was like a public slap. The idea of Lauren receiving any credit, of her name being associated with the company's success, was intolerable. Something inside the matriarch snapped at that moment. An anger accumulated over years of feeling her control threatened, of seeing her son in love with a woman she would never approve of witnessing the competence of someone who, in her distorted mind, should always remain in the background. What happened next would be remembered by all present as one of the most shocking moments in London's business history. Helena picked up her glass of red wine, a full-bodied and deep-colored drink, and with a deliberate, calculated, cruel movement, poured the entire content over Lauren's cream-colored dress. The liquid ran down the delicate fabric, staining not just the dress, but symbolically marking that moment as a watershed. The entire ballroom fell silent. 300 people witnessed that public aggression, that display of cruelty disguised as an accident. But everyone knew it hadn't been an accident. Helena's gaze made that very clear. It was a message, a warning, a display of power. It was the matriarch telling everyone there, "This is my company, this is my family, and I decide who has worth and who doesn't." Lauren remained motionless for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. The wine ran down her dress, dripping onto the marble floor. She didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't react with violence. She simply stood there, absorbing the humiliation with a dignity that brutally contrasted with the cruelty of the gesture. Her eyes met Marcus's, seeking some support, some reaction, some defense. But her husband was paralyzed, pale, unable to move or speak. It was then that something unexpected happened. From the back of the ballroom, a man of approximately 50, with grey hair and discreet framed glasses, began to walk towards the stage. It was Robert Miller, the senior lawyer of the Atherton Smith Group, a man known for his unwavering integrity and his deep knowledge of the company's legal intricacies. Robert had witnessed many things during his 25 years of service, but that crossed all boundaries. With firm steps, Robert walked onto the stage and, before all the cameras, offered his blazer to Lauren. "Allow me, madam," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Lauren accepted the gesture, covering her stained dress. Robert then turned to Helena and, with a calm voice but laden with reproof, said, "I believe you need a moment to compose yourself. Perhaps it would be best to conclude the official event here." Robert's suggestion was like a shock of reality. The representatives of Bergman Industries were already murmuring among themselves, clearly uncomfortable. Journalists whispered, and some already began frantically typing on their phones, sending out the first notes about the scandal. The celebratory atmosphere had transformed into something tense, embarrassing, impossible to ignore. Helena tried to regain control of the situation. "It was an accident," she said, in a voice that sounded false even to the most naive. "I apologize for what happened. Let's continue the celebration." But no one believed her. The damage was done, and there was no undoing it. Lauren, still wrapped in Robert's blazer, descended from the stage with her head held high. She didn't run, didn't hide. She walked through the ballroom towards the exit, and with each step she could feel the looks of those present upon her. Some were of pity, others of morbid curiosity, but there were also looks of respect, of admiration for the way she maintained her composure in the face of such humiliation. Marcus finally reacted, running after his wife. "Lauren, wait," he called. But when he reached her in the corridor outside the ballroom, he didn't know what to say. The words died in his throat, suffocated by guilt and cowardice. Lauren looked at her husband with a mix of disappointment and sadness. "You said nothing," she murmured. "Before everyone, before the cameras, your mother humiliated me, and you said absolutely nothing." Marcus opened his mouth to defend himself, but what defense could there be? He had failed his wife at the moment she needed him most. I didn't know what to do," he managed to say, his voice weak. Lauren shook her head, tears finally welling up, not from weakness but from pure disappointment. "You always know what to do when your mother orders it. But when it comes to defending me, you don't know. I understand now." She walked away, leaving Marcus alone in the corridor, the sound of the celebration continuing in the background like an ironic soundtrack to the marriage that had just revealed its deepest cracks. Lauren hailed a taxi in front of the hotel, still wearing Robert's blazer over her stained dress, and went to the apartment she shared with Marcus in Chelsea, an affluent neighborhood in South London. Meanwhile, inside the ballroom, events continued to unfold. A young journalist named Beatrice Carter, who had been invited as a guest of one of the investors, had recorded the entire incident on her cell phone. Instinctively, without thinking of the consequences, she posted the video on her social media with a simple but powerful caption. "When power reveals its true face, businesswoman publicly humiliates daughter-in-law during corporate event in London." The video began circulating immediately. In minutes, it was being shared by hundreds of people. In an hour, it was thousands. The hashtags that spontaneously emerged on social media began to go viral, and what had happened in that restricted ballroom of the Grand Regent Hotel was now exposed for the entire world to see and judge. Lauren arrived home, locked herself in the bedroom, and finally allowed the emotions she had suppressed all night to surface. She cried for the humiliation, for her husband's betrayal in not defending her, for the years of silent contempt she had endured trying to be accepted by a family that would never accept her. But as she cried, something within her began to transform. The pain was giving way to anger, and anger was beginning to crystallize into determination. She stood up, washed her face, and went to the home office she kept. She turned on her computer and began to review documents, contracts, shareholdings. Lauren had kept every piece of evidence, every record, every proof of her real contribution to the Atherton Smith Group. And more than that, she had the papers that proved her majority stake in the company. If Helena wanted war, she would have war, but it would be a war fought in the courts, in boardrooms, in the arena where Lauren was unbeatable, the arena of documented truth and professional competence. That night, as London slept and social media buzzed with the scandal, 3 people couldn't sleep. Helena, in her Mayfair mansion, realizing too late that her impulsive gesture could have unforeseen consequences. Marcus, on the living room sofa of the empty apartment, as Lauren had locked the bedroom door, understanding that he had crossed a line from which there might be no return. And Lauren, in her office, planning the next steps of a journey she didn't even know she was about to begin, a journey that would reveal not only the truth about the Atherton Smith empire, but also the truth about who she truly was and what she was capable of. The wine spilled that night was just the beginning. What was to come would make that stain seem insignificant. Tell me your opinion of this story, and how you think it will end. The dawn brought with it a grey London, with that overcast sky typical of a winter Saturday in the city. Lauren woke up on the office sofa, still dressed in the clothes from the night before, Robert Miller's blazer carefully folded on the table. She had no idea when she had finally fallen asleep, exhausted from the tears and the emotional weight of everything that had happened. Her cell phone flashed insistently with dozens of notifications, but she didn't have the courage to look. Outside the office, Marcus had been awake since 5 in the morning, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee in his hands. He had spent the entire night on the living room sofa, mentally reliving every second of that terrible moment, his paralysis, his inability to defend his own wife. How many times throughout their marriage had he chosen silence to avoid confrontations with his mother? How many times had Lauren swallowed humiliation in silence, waiting for him to take a stand that never came? When Lauren finally emerged from the office, her eyes met Marcus's. There was a distance there that hadn't existed before, an abyss carved by disappointment. She said nothing, just took a bottle of water from the refrigerator and returned to the office, closing the door behind her. That silent gesture was more painful for Marcus than any scream or accusation could have been. Meanwhile, across the city, in the imposing Atherton Smith family mansion located in the exclusive Mayfair district, Helena had also been unable to sleep. But her reasons were different. It wasn't remorse that kept her awake. It was anger. Anger that her gesture of power had been filmed and exposed on social media. Anger that Lauren had gained public sympathy. Anger that her control over the narrative was slipping from her hands. She called Christina Harding, her press advisor for over 15 years. "We need to control this scandal," Helena said without even greeting her. "I want you to prepare an official statement saying it was an accident, that there was a misunderstanding, that the company regrets what happened." Christina, on the other end of the line, hesitated. She had seen the video, as had millions of people. There was no way to sell that as an accident. "Mrs. Helena," she began cautiously, "perhaps it would be best to adopt a strategic silence for now. The narrative is already established, and any attempt at denial could worsen the situation." Helena hung up without responding. She wasn't used to hearing no, to receiving advice that contradicted her will. For decades, she had shaped the reality around her through the strength of her personality and her economic power. But this was a new era, an era where cell phone cameras and social media could bring down empires built on appearances in a matter of hours. The video posted by Beatrice Carter had surpassed 5 million views overnight. The comments were overwhelmingly favorable to Lauren. Women across the country identified with that public humiliation, with that cruelty disguised as social superiority. Feminist movements on social media began to use the incident as an example of psychological violence in the corporate and family environment. The hashtag that had spontaneously emerged was among the most commented topics in the UK. On Saturday morning, Lauren finally picked up her cell phone. Among the hundreds of messages, one caught her attention. It was from Robert Miller, the lawyer who had offered her his blazer the night before. The message was short and direct. "Mrs. Lauren, I need to speak with you urgently. It's about matters that go far beyond what happened yesterday. Can we meet this afternoon at my office? It's important." Lauren replied yes. There was something in the tone of Robert's message that suggested he knew more than he let on. At 3 in the afternoon, she was at the elegant law firm in the legal quarter, where Robert awaited her with a folder full of documents on the table. "Mrs. Lauren," Robert began after she sat down, I've worked for the Atherton Smith Group for 25 years. In that time, I've seen a lot. I've witnessed questionable decisions, maneuvers on the edge of legality, unjust treatments. But what I saw yesterday crossed all boundaries. He paused, adjusting his glasses. I can no longer be a silent accomplice to a system that allows people like you to be treated this way. Lauren watched him in silence, not knowing exactly where that conversation would lead. Robert continued. I know who you truly are within the company. I know about your shareholdings. I know about your role in structuring the deal with Bergman Industries. And I also know things you probably don't know. He opened the folder and began to display documents. For years, Mrs. Helena and Marcus have been engaging in accounting irregularities. Diversion of funds to offshore accounts, overpriced contracts with shell companies, large-scale tax evasion. All very well disguised, very well documented, to appear legal but fundamentally corrupt. Lauren felt her blood run cold in her veins. She had always known Helena was a ruthless businesswoman, but she had never imagined things would reach this point. Why are you telling me this now? She asked. Robert sighed. Because I'm tired of protecting people who don't deserve protection. Because I saw what they did to you yesterday, and I was ashamed to be part of that structure. And because you have the power to change it. He explained that as the largest individual shareholder of the company, Lauren had the right to convene an extraordinary general meeting and demand a full audit of the accounts. With the evidence Robert possessed, it would be possible not only to remove Helena from the presidency, but also to criminally prosecute her for the irregularities committed. Is Marcus involved too? Lauren asked, though she already knew the answer. Robert nodded sadly. Not as much as Mrs. Helena, but he knew and benefited. There are proofs of transfers to accounts in his name. Lauren ran her hands over her face. In less than 24 hours, her life had completely transformed. Her marriage in ruins, her mother-in-law who hated her exposed as a criminal, her husband revealed as an accomplice. And she, who had always tried to do everything right, working hard, building her career based on merit, now found herself at the center of a corporate scandal of gigantic proportions. I need to think, she finally said. Robert agreed. Take all the time you need, but know that the opportunity is now. Yesterday's scandal put the spotlight on the company. If we're going to act, this is the moment. He handed her a copy of all the documents. Keep this in a safe place. It's years of silent investigation. It's everything we need to bring down the castle of appearances they built. Lauren left Robert's office carrying the folder of documents as if she carried the weight of the world. She took an Uber to Hyde Park. She needed fresh air, space to think. She sat on a bench near the lake, watching families pass by, children running, couples holding hands. All that normality seemed so distant from the storm she was living through. Her cell phone rang. It was Beatrice Carter, the journalist who had recorded the video. Mrs. Lauren, I apologize for bothering you. I got your number from a source. I know you must be going through a difficult time, but I'd like to offer you the opportunity to tell your version of the story. My video went viral, and now everyone wants to know who the woman behind that stained dress is. Lauren hesitated. Her first reaction was to refuse. She had never sought the spotlight, never wanted to be the center of attention. But then she thought of all the women who were commenting on the video, identifying with her pain, sharing their own stories of humiliation and abuse. Perhaps it was time to use that voice she had always kept controlled. Yes, she replied, let's talk. But I don't want sensationalism. I want to tell the truth, only the truth. Beatrice agreed immediately. They arranged to meet the next day, Sunday, at a discreet cafe in Notting Hill. When Lauren returned home at dusk, Marcus was waiting for her in the living room. He stood up as soon as she entered, his words stumbling over each other in a mix of apologies and justifications. Lauren, I need you to understand. I wanted to say something, but I was in shock. I didn't know how to react. My mother should never have done that. It was horrible, unforgivable. Lauren looked at him with a coldness he had never seen before. Marcus, you had 7 years to defend me. 7 years of minor humiliations, of malicious comments, of constant disrespect from your mother. And each of those times, you chose silence. Yesterday was just the culmination of years of cowardice. She paused, letting the words sink in. But the worst isn't even that. The worst is knowing that you participated in irregularities in the company, that you benefited from the diversion of funds, that you are as corrupt as she is. Marcus paled. Who told you that? Lauren didn't answer. She simply walked past him and went to the bedroom. I'll sleep in the guest room tonight, she said before closing the door. Tomorrow, we need to have a very serious conversation about the future of our marriage and the company. In the Mayfair mansion, Helena received an unexpected call. It was Kurt Schmidt, the president of Bergman Industries. His voice was tense, formal. Frau Atherton-Smith, we need to discuss the deal. Our board is concerned about the Atherton-Smith Group's public image after yesterday's events. We are considering a re-evaluation of the terms. Helena felt the ground collapse beneath her feet. That deal was the crowning achievement of her career, the definitive consolidation of the empire she had built. To lose that would be to lose everything. Mr. Schmidt, she said, trying to keep her voice firm, yesterday's incident was regrettable, but it does not reflect the values or the solidity of the company. I ask you not to make hasty decisions based on an unfortunate moment. Kurt was direct. It's not just the incident, Frau Atherton-Smith. Our due diligence team has started to find some inconsistencies in the financial statements. Nothing serious yet, but enough to warrant a more in-depth audit. We will get back to you in a few days. Helena hung up the phone, and for the first time in decades, she felt fear. Fear that the house of cards she had built was about to crumble. Fear that her arrogance had finally exacted a price she could not pay. The next day, Sunday, Lauren met Beatrice Carter at the agreed cafe. The journalist arrived with a recorder and a notebook, but before starting the interview, she turned off all equipment and looked directly at Lauren. Before we officially begin, I need to tell you something. I didn't record that video by chance. I work for an investigative journalism portal. We've been investigating the Atherton-Smith Group for months, following traces of financial irregularities. What happened on Friday was an unexpected opportunity to put the spotlight on the company. Lauren absorbed that information in silence. Then, the pieces began to fall into place. You were there on purpose, she concluded. Beatrice nodded. I got the invitation through contacts. I didn't expect something so dramatic to happen, but when it did, I knew it was time to act. She leaned forward. Mrs. Lauren, I know you are the true force behind that company. I know about your shareholdings. I know about your role in the deal with Bergman. And I suspect you may be starting to discover things about Helena and Marcus that go far beyond family matters. Lauren hesitated only a moment before deciding to trust that young journalist who, in a way, had become an unexpected ally. If I give you access to documents that prove serious irregularities, would you be able to publish a full investigation? Beatrice smiled, and in that smile was the determination of someone born to reveal inconvenient truths. Mrs. Lauren, that's exactly what we've been waiting for months. With your shareholdings and the right documents, we can not only expose the crimes, but also legally protect you as a whistleblower. They spent the next 3 hours talking, planning, structuring a strategy that combined legal action, journalistic exposure, and personal protection for Lauren. When they parted, it was already dark over London, and both knew they had just started something that would change not only their lives, but potentially the entire British corporate landscape. Lauren returned home feeling, for the first time in days, master of her own destiny. No longer the humiliated daughter-in-law, no longer the silent wife who accepted crumbs of respect. She was Lauren Miller, a brilliant engineer, a competent executive, the largest shareholder of the Atherton-Smith Group, and she was about to show Helena and Marcus that underestimating her had been the biggest mistake they could have made. Marcus was in the living room when she arrived. He had spent the entire day waiting, trying to find words that could fix what was broken, but when he saw the expression on Lauren's face, he knew no words were capable of that. "We need to talk," she said, and there was a firmness in her voice he had never heard before. "About our marriage, about the company, about everything." They sat face to face, and for the first time in 7 years of marriage, Lauren wasn't asking. She was demanding. She wasn't suggesting, she was setting boundaries. She wasn't waiting to be accepted. She was defining the terms of her own presence. And Marcus, accustomed to being the center of decisions, the heir everyone served, discovered that he had married a woman he had never really known, a woman who was only just beginning to reveal her true strength. The storm that had begun with a spilled glass of wine was only just beginning to show its true magnitude. And at its center, no longer as a victim, but as the protagonist of her own story, was Lauren, ready to turn the tables and rebuild not just a company but her own life. Monday dawned with London shrouded in a fine drizzle, that persistent rain that seemed to wash the streets and at the same time carry a weight of melancholy. Lauren woke up earlier than usual, with a mental clarity she hadn't felt in years. She had made decisions during the night, decisions that would irrevocably change the course of her life. She put on a navy blue suit, tied her hair in an impeccable bun, and for the first time in a long time, looked at herself in the mirror and saw not the rejected daughter-in-law but the competent executive she had always been. Marcus was still sleeping when she left the apartment, or pretending to sleep, Lauren wasn't sure. The conversation the night before had been long and painful. He had tried to justify his participation in the company's irregularities, claiming he was only following his mother's orders, that he didn't know the extent of the problems, that he was willing to correct everything. But Lauren was no longer the woman who accepted empty excuses. She had made it clear, either he cooperated with the investigation that was about to begin, or he would be dragged down with Helena in the inevitable fall of the corrupt empire. The Atherton Smith Group's office was located in one of the most modern buildings on Canary Wharf, the heart of London's financial centre. Lauren arrived at 7:30 in the morning, before most employees. She went directly to Robert Miller's office, who was already waiting for her, with fresh coffee and more documents spread across the table. "Mrs. Lauren," he greeted her, "I've prepared everything as we discussed. The documents to convene the extraordinary general meeting are ready. They just need your signature." Lauren picked up the pen, but before signing, she asked, "Robert, once I do this, there's no turning back. Are you sure you want to get involved in this? Helena is powerful. She has many allies. She won't accept this passively." Robert smiled, a tired but determined smile. "Mrs. Lauren, I've spent 25 years of my life protecting people who didn't deserve protection. Enough. It's time to use my knowledge to do the right thing, even if it means facing consequences." Lauren signed the documents. At that moment, with the stroke of her pen, she was officially convening an extraordinary general meeting of shareholders to discuss the company's management and demand a full and independent audit of its accounts. As the largest individual shareholder, she had that right. And more than that, she had the duty to protect the company she herself had helped build. Upstairs, in the presidential office with a panoramic view of the city, Helena arrived at 8 sharp as always. Her secretary, Mrs. Carmen, a woman in her 50s who had worked for the company for over 2 decades, greeted her with a concerned expression. "Mrs. Helena, you received an official notification. It's about a convocation for an extraordinary general meeting." Helena took the document from Carmen's hands and felt her blood boil. The convocation was signed by Lauren Miller Atherton Smith in her capacity as the largest individual shareholder of the company. "This is impossible," Helena murmured. "How can she be the largest shareholder?" But even as she spoke, she began to understand the discrete acquisitions over the years, the investments Lauren had made using her own resources, the shareholdings she had accumulated while everyone underestimated her. Helena had been so arrogant, so blind in her contempt, that she hadn't realized she was creating her own tormentor. She picked up the phone and called Marcus. "Come to my office immediately," she ordered, without even waiting for him to respond. Marcus, who was already on his way to the building, felt his stomach churn. He knew the storm was only just beginning. Meanwhile, in a meeting room on the 10th floor, Lauren met with Beatrice Carter and her investigative journalism team. They had brought laptops, recorders, piles of documents. "We'll need time to analyze all of this properly," Beatrice explained. "But from what I've already seen in the documents you've given us, We have enough material for a series of reports that will shake the foundations of the British financial market. One of the journalists on the team, a young man named Philip, pointed to some specific records. Look at this, Lauren. Monthly transfers to an offshore company in the Cayman Islands. Always the same amount. Always on the same day of the month. It's a classic pattern of money laundering. Lauren felt divided between the satisfaction of finally having concrete evidence and the sadness of confirming that the man she had married was, in fact, part of that corruption. The meeting was interrupted by an urgent knock on the door. It was Carmen, Helena's secretary, with the red eyes of someone who had recently cried. "Mrs. Lauren, may I speak with you privately?" Lauren excused herself from the journalists and went into the corridor with Carmen. The older woman held Lauren's hands with desperate intensity. "Mrs. Lauren, I know things. Things Mrs. Helena did over the years. Things I should have reported a long time ago. But I was afraid. Afraid of losing my job. Afraid of retaliation. But after what she did to you on Friday, I can't stay silent anymore." Lauren led Carmen to an empty room. "Tell me everything," she said, and Carmen began to speak. It was 20 minutes of revelations that left Lauren increasingly shocked. Forged contracts, bribes to inspectors, threats to competitors. Helena had not built an empire solely with hard work, but with a combination of competence and absolute lack of scruples. And Carmen had documents, emails, recordings of conversations. She had kept everything as a kind of personal insurance, should she ever need to protect herself. "Why are you telling me this now?" Lauren asked. Carmen wiped away her tears. "Because I saw you come in here this morning. I saw your posture, your determination. And I thought, this is the person who can finally do the right thing. This is the person who has the courage to confront Mrs. Helena and win." She handed Lauren a USB drive. "Here's everything. Use it wisely." When Lauren returned to the meeting room, she carried not only Carmen's USB drive, but also the confirmation that there were many more people within the company waiting for the opportunity to see the truth prevail. Beatrice's team was euphoric with the new material. "With this, we can publish the first report as early as tomorrow," Beatrice said. In the presidential office, the meeting between Helena and Marcus was far from friendly. "How could you let this happen?" Helena shouted. "How could you be so stupid as not to realize your wife was buying company shares?" Marcus, for the first time in his life, didn't cower before his mother's fury. "Mother, the problem isn't what Lauren did. The problem is what we did. The diversions, the irregularities, all of it will come to light. And when it does, no surname or money will protect us." Helena stared at him coldly. "Are you on her side now? Is that it?" Marcus took a deep breath. "I'm on the side of truth, Mother, and the truth is we built all of this on a rotten foundation. I was an accomplice, I know. But I can still try to make amends." Helena let out a bitter laugh. "Make amends? Son, you understand nothing about power. Power isn't mended, power is wielded. And that's exactly what I'm going to do." She picked up the phone and began to make a series of calls, to influential lawyers, to politicians with whom she had done business over the years, to journalists who were on her payroll. Helena was mobilizing, her full arsenal, preparing for a war she had no intention of losing. But what she didn't know was that the world had changed. The old rules of the game, where power and money bought silence, were being rewritten by a generation that valued transparency and justice above convenience and blind loyalty. In the afternoon, the news about the convocation of the extraordinary general meeting began circulating in the financial market. Atherton Smith Group shares fell 3% in a matter of hours. Investors began asking questions. Analysts initiated re-evaluations. The house of cards was beginning to crumble, and Helena could feel the ground shifting beneath her feet. Lauren spent the rest of the day in meetings with Robert and with members of the board of directors who had been marginalized by Helena over the years. She discovered that there were many within the company who were tired of the matriarch's authoritarian management, who wanted changes but lacked the political strength to promote them. Now, with Lauren leading the opposition, they finally saw an opportunity. One of these directors was Anthony Rivers, a 60-year-old respected economist who had been on the board since the company's founding. He had been a friend of Helena's late husband and had witnessed the woman's transformation over the decades. "Lauren," he said privately, "your father-in-law was a man of integrity. He built this company based on solid values. When he passed, Helena took control and, little by little, began to distort everything. At first they were small ethical deviations, then they grew larger. Many of us tried to intervene, but she silenced us one by one, using threats and manipulation. You are our last hope to rescue the original legacy of this company." Anthony's words touched Lauren deeply. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for something bigger, for a principle, for a legacy that deserved to be preserved. "Can I count on your support at the meeting?" she asked. Anthony nodded firmly. "Not just mine, but 4 other directors. Together, we represent 40% of the board's votes. With your shareholdings and our support, we can remove Helena from the presidency." When Lauren left the building at the end of the day, already dark and with the drizzle turned into heavy rain, she felt both exhausted and invigorated. Each step she took moved her further away from the woman she had been and closer to the woman she was becoming. She hailed a taxi and instead of going straight home asked the driver to take her to Hyde Park. Even with the rain, she needed that moment of connection with something greater, with the city she loved, with the life she was rebuilding. She sat on a covered bench watching the rain fall on the lake, the drops forming concentric circles on the water's surface. Her cell phone rang. It was Marcus. "Lauren, where are you? We need to talk." She hesitated before answering. "I'm in Hyde Park. I needed to think." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Can I come there, please?" Half an hour later, Marcus was sitting beside her on the bench, both watching the rain in silence. Finally, he spoke. "This morning, I talked to my mother. It was the first time in my life I really confronted her. I told her I won't be an accomplice anymore, that I'll cooperate with the investigation, that I'll tell everything I know." He looked at Lauren, and there were tears in his eyes. "I know I've probably lost you. I know I destroyed our trust, but I want you to know that for the first time, I'm trying to be the man you deserve, even if it's too late." Lauren looked at him, and there was no anger in her eyes, only a deep sadness. "Marcus, the problem was never you making mistakes. We all do. The problem was you repeatedly choosing to protect your mother over me, choosing the comfort of omission over the courage of truth. I don't know if our marriage can be fixed, but I know that, regardless of what happens between us, you need to do the right thing now. Not for me, but for yourself." They sat there for some more time, 2 strangers who had once been husband and wife, now united only by the complex web of consequences their choices had woven. When they finally stood up to leave, there was a tacit understanding between them. The path ahead would be difficult, painful, but necessary. On Tuesday morning, Beatrice Carter's first report was published. The title was impactful but factual. Documents reveal possible accounting irregularities at Atherton Smith Group. The article was carefully written, presenting the evidence without sensationalism, allowing the facts to speak for themselves. The impact was immediate. The company's shares plummeted another 10%. The Financial Conduct Authority announced it would open an investigation, and the Crown Prosecution Service issued a statement saying it was monitoring the case. Helena was caught completely by surprise. She had underestimated not only Lauren, but also the power of truth when documented and publicly exposed. Her lawyers rushed to do damage control, issuing statements denying everything, promising to sue the news portal for defamation. But each denial sounded more desperate than the last. At the Atherton Smith Group's office, the atmosphere was palpably tense. Employees whispered through the corridors, investors called, demanding explanations. Suppliers began to question contracts. The empire Helena had so carefully built was crumbling before her eyes, and for the first time in her life, she felt powerless to stop it. Lauren, for her part, was in a meeting with the legal team Robert had assembled. Lawyers specializing in corporate law, financial crimes, and whistleblower protection. They were preparing not only Lauren's legal defense, but also the formal charges that would be brought against Helena and other executives involved in the irregularities. The extraordinary general meeting was scheduled for 10 days later. 10 days that would determine not only the future of the Atherton Smith Group, but also the future of all people involved in that complex web of power, betrayal, and redemption. And at the center of it all, a woman who had been publicly humiliated and who, instead of cowering, decided to stand up and fight not only for justice but for dignity, for truth, for a future where competence and integrity were worth more than surnames and appearances. The 10 days leading up to the extraordinary general meeting were the most intense Lauren had ever lived. London seemed to pulsate with a different energy, as if the entire city was watching that clash between the old and the new, between institutionalized corruption and the pursuit of transparency. Beatrice Carter's reports continued to be published, each one revealing another layer of the rot that hid behind the gleaming facade of the Atherton Smith Group. Overpriced contracts, fraudulent bids, bribery schemes that dated back more than a decade. Helena tried everything. Her lawyers filed lawsuits against the news portal, demanding the removal of the articles. Her political contacts tried to pressure authorities to delay investigations. Her allies in the business world mobilized to create an alternative narrative in traditional media, painting Lauren as a vindictive opportunist who wanted to destroy the company out of personal resentment. But none of it worked. The truth, when well documented and presented with journalistic integrity, had its own strength that could not be contained by public relations or economic power. On the morning of the meeting, Lauren woke up before dawn. She stood for a few minutes at the apartment window, watching London awaken with its lights and movements. Marcus had moved into the guest room permanently, and although they still lived under the same roof, they lived parallel lives. He had kept his promise to cooperate with the investigations, providing documents and testimonies that incriminated both his mother and himself. It was a late attempt at redemption, but at least it was an attempt. Lauren put on a light grey suit, elegant but not ostentatious. She tied her hair in a low ponytail and wore comfortable shoes. She didn't want to appear as if she was going to war, although that was exactly what she was doing. She wanted to appear as she always had, a competent, confident, prepared professional. She picked up the folder with all the documents she would need and left the apartment without looking back. The meeting would be held in the main auditorium of the Atherton Smith Group building, a spacious area with capacity for 200 people. When Lauren arrived at 8:30 in the morning, the venue was already filling up. Shareholders, board members, representatives of investment funds, lawyers, authorized journalists. There was a palpable tension in the air, that electric sensation that precedes historical moments. Robert Miller was waiting for her near the entrance, alongside Anthony Rivers and the other directors who had sided with Lauren. "Are you ready?" Robert asked. Lauren nodded, though her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it, more ready than ever. Helena arrived 15 minutes later, making a calculated entrance to make an impact. She wore a vibrant red ensemble, her hair perfectly styled, discreet but expensive jewelry. She walked down the central aisle of the auditorium as if she were a queen entering her kingdom, greeting people with nods, maintaining that mask of unwavering confidence. But anyone looking closely would see the lines of tension around her eyes, the rigidity in the way she held her handbag. Marcus arrived alone shortly after his mother. He did not sit next to Helena, as would be expected. Nor did he sit next to Lauren. He chose a seat in the middle of the auditorium, a neutral position that reflected his own indecision. Lauren saw him enter, and for a brief moment their eyes met. There was a shared sadness there, the recognition that both had lost something precious that they might never recover. At 9 o'clock sharp, the meeting began. The chairman of the board of directors, a man named Edward Martin, who had always been neutral in internal disputes, opened the session by explaining the procedures. The agenda was clear: discussion on the company's management, presentation of the results of the preliminary audit that had been conducted in recent weeks, and a vote on possible changes to the executive board. The first to speak was Helena. She stood with dignity and walked to the podium. Her voice was firm as she began, "Ladies and gentlemen, I built this company alongside my late husband. When he passed, I took on the responsibility not only of maintaining it, but of transforming it into the powerhouse it is today. Over these years, I have made difficult decisions, faced crises, navigated economic storms. I have not always been perfect, but I have always acted with the objective of protecting this company and its shareholders." She paused, her eyes sweeping the auditorium. "The accusations that have been made against me are unfounded, based on malicious interpretations of legitimate transactions. Yes, our accounting is complex. Yes, we do business in various international jurisdictions. But this is normal for a company of our size. What is not normal is a defamatory campaign orchestrated by someone with personal interests in destroying this family and this company." Her eyes met Lauren's, and there was a direct challenge. "Lauren Miller joined this company as a consultant. She met my son and married him. Over the years, while pretending to be a devoted wife, she systematically acquired shares of the company, building a position of power. And now, after an unfortunate incident where I accidentally spilled wine on her dress, she decides to use this as a pretext to try to bring me down." Helena's speech was skillful, attempting to transform a matter of corporate irregularities into a matter of personal revenge. But when she finished and returned to her seat, it was clear that many in the auditorium were not convinced. The evidence presented in the reports was too solid, too detailed to be simply ignored. Then it was Lauren's turn. She slowly stood up, adjusted her blazer, and walked to the podium. For a moment, she stood there in silence, looking at all those people. She felt the weight of so many gazes, so many expectations, but she also felt something more, the certainty that she was doing the right thing, that she had truth on her side. "My name is Lauren Miller Atherton Smith," she began, her voice clear but emotional. "And yes, it is true that I joined this company as an external consultant. It is true that I married Marcus Atherton Smith, and it is true that, over the years, I acquired significant shareholdings in the company. But I will clarify a few points that Mrs. Helena deliberately omitted." Lauren took a deep breath. "Every share I bought was paid for with my own money, earned through my work as a consultant and then as an executive. Every investment was legally documented and registered. I stole nothing. I deceived no one. I simply did what any competent professional would do. I invested in my own work, in the company I helped build." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was laden with emotion. "As for the incident at the gala, that was not an accident. Everyone present knows that. The video that circulated on social media clearly shows it. And that was not an isolated event. It was the culmination of 7 years of humiliations, of contempt, of inhumane treatment. But this meeting was not convened because of that. It was convened because, as the largest individual shareholder of this company, I have a duty to protect it from irregularities that could destroy it." Lauren then began to present the evidence. Projections appeared on the screen behind her, showing suspicious transfers, fraudulent contracts, forged documents. Each accusation was accompanied by solid documentation, by numbers that didn't lie, by patterns that were impossible to ignore. The room fell into absolute silence as Lauren spoke, methodically deconstructing decades of corruption disguised as business success. "I don't do this out of revenge," she said at the end of her presentation. "I do it because I believe this company has the potential to be something greater than it is today. I believe we can honor the original legacy of the founder, who was a man of integrity. I believe we can build a future based on transparency, competence, and ethics." When Lauren returned to her seat, there were tears in the eyes of many present, not tears of pity, but of admiration. She had transformed her pain into dignity, her humiliation into strength, her victim status into a leadership role. The vote was held. The result was overwhelming. 87% of the shareholders present voted for Helena's immediate removal from the company's presidency and for the establishment of a full and independent audit. They also voted for the creation of a new executive board, with Lauren as chairwoman of the board of directors. Helena turned pale when the result was announced. For the first time in decades, she had lost not just a vote, but her empire, her identity, everything she had fought for. She stood up, picked up her handbag, and walked towards the exit with what remained of her dignity. Before leaving, she turned one last time to look at Lauren. There was no more anger in that look, only a bitter understanding that she had completely underestimated the woman she had always despised. Marcus was not immediately removed, but was suspended from his executive duties while investigations proceeded. He approached Lauren after the meeting. "Lauren," he said, his voice choked, "you were right. About everything. And I was wrong. About everything." Lauren looked at him with a mixture of sadness and compassion. "Marcus, you can still redeem yourself. You can still choose to be the man of integrity your father was. But that is a choice only you can make." They parted there, not with anger or resentment, but with the recognition that some damages are too deep to be repaired, that some paths, once chosen, do not allow a return to the starting point. Marcus would have to find his own path to redemption, and Lauren would have to build her own life, free from the chains that had held her for so long. In the weeks that followed, the Atherton Smith Group underwent a profound transformation. The full audit revealed even more irregularities than initially discovered. The Crown Prosecution Service brought criminal charges against Helena and other involved executives. Marcus, for having cooperated with the investigations, received a plea bargain that spared him from more severe consequences, but his name was stained in the corporate world. Lauren assumed the chair of the board with a clear mission: to rebuild the company on solid, ethical, and transparent foundations. She created a rigorous compliance program, established anonymous reporting channels, and implemented regular audits. More than that, she transformed the company culture, valuing competence over surnames, integrity over blind loyalty. The deal with Bergman Industries, which had been jeopardized by the scandal, was renegotiated and finally signed, but now under new conditions that ensured total transparency and genuine mutual benefits. Kurt Schmidt, in a later interview, stated that he had more confidence in the company now, under new management, than he had ever had before. Beatrice Carter won an investigative journalism award for her coverage of the case. Her work became a reference in journalism schools as an example of ethical, well-founded, and socially relevant reporting. She and Lauren developed a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and the certainty that they had, together, done something important. Robert Miller was promoted to legal director of the company, a position where he could finally use his knowledge to build rather than just protect secrets. Carmen, the secretary who had kept evidence for years, received a position of greater responsibility and respect within the organization. As for Lauren and Marcus, the marriage was officially dissolved 6 months after the meeting. It was an amicable separation, without disputes or bitterness. Both understood that they had married under false pretenses, that they had never truly known each other beyond the social masks each wore. Marcus moved to Edinburgh, where he began to work for a non-governmental organization focused on education for young people from disadvantaged communities. It was his way of trying to build something positive from the rubble of his past choices. Lauren remained in London, in the city she loved, rebuilding not just a company but her own life. A few months after the separation, she began to frequent places she had always liked but had abandoned during her marriage: art house cinemas, independent bookstores, quiet cafes where she could read and think. It was on one of these occasions in a Notting Hill bookstore on a rainy Sunday afternoon that she met Andrew, a philosophy professor who knew nothing about the corporate world and wasn't impressed by surnames or fortunes. They started talking about a book they were both browsing, and the conversation extended for hours, then to other meetings, then to a genuine connection that grew without haste or pressure. 1 year after the extraordinary general meeting, Lauren was invited to give a lecture at a conference on female leadership in the corporate world. The auditorium was packed with women of all ages, many of them facing their own battles against systems that tried to silence them. Lauren told her story not as a victim seeking compassion, but as a survivor who had discovered her own strength. "A year ago," she said at the end of the lecture, "a glass of wine was spilled on my dress, in front of hundreds of people. At that moment, I thought I was being destroyed. But now I understand that it was, in fact, a moment of liberation, because it forced me to make a choice: remain silent and accept the abuse, or raise my voice and fight for the truth. I chose the second option, and that choice changed everything. She looked at the audience, seeing in many faces the reflection of her own struggles. If there's one thing I want you to take from this story, it's this. Your voice matters. Your dignity matters. Your work, your competence, your integrity. All of it matters more than any surname, more than any appearance of power. And when you are confronted with the choice between convenient silence and inconvenient truth, choose truth. Always choose truth. The applause that followed was long and emotional. Many women approached afterwards to share their own stories, to thank Lauren for having the courage to expose what so many lived in silence. And Lauren realized that her journey, however painful it had been, had served a purpose greater than herself. It had opened the way for other women, had shown that it was possible to confront corrupt power structures and win, not through revenge or violence, but through truth, documentation, persistence, and the courage not to accept the unacceptable. Lauren's life did not become perfect after the victory at the meeting. There were still difficult days, moments of doubt, emotional scars that took time to heal, but there was also a deep sense of peace that came from knowing she had done the right thing, that she had honored her own values even when it was difficult, even when the price seemed too high to pay. On an autumn afternoon, Lauren was in her new apartment, smaller than the previous one but with more light and a beautiful view of Hyde Park. Andrew was in the kitchen preparing coffee, and they planned to spend the rest of Sunday simply existing, without agendas or obligations. Lauren's cell phone rang. It was a message from Beatrice. The verdict just came in. Helena has been convicted. Justice has been served. Lauren read the message and felt a complex mix of emotions. There was no joy in her former mother-in-law's conviction, just a sense of closure that a cycle had finally ended. She replied with a simple, "Thanks for letting me know." She put her phone aside and went to the window, watching the city continue its routine, indifferent to the personal dramas unfolding in its millions of lives. Andrew approached from behind, placed a cup of coffee in her hands, and stood by her side in supportive silence. He didn't need to say anything. Lauren knew that in Andrew she had found something she had never had with Marcus, a genuine partnership based on mutual respect, on true conversations, on unconditional support. It wasn't a dramatic soap opera love, but it was something deeper. It was a love, built on honesty, on the willingness to see and accept the other as they truly are. "Is everything okay?" Andrew asked softly. Lauren nodded. "Yes, finally, everything is okay." And it was true. For the first time in a long time, Lauren could say that and truly feel its veracity. The empire of appearances had fallen, the truth had prevailed, and she was free. Free to be who she truly was, free to build the life she truly wanted, free from the chains that had for so long bound her to others' expectations and corrupt structures. The wine stain that had once seemed like the end of the world had transformed into the beginning of a new story. A story where Lauren was no longer a supporting character, but the protagonist. A story where dignity was worth more than status, where truth was worth more than convenience, where courage was worth more than conformity. And that story, Lauren knew, was only just beginning. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that Lauren and Helena's story has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of courage, redemption, and justice, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what resonated with you most. Have you ever experienced or know someone who faced situations of humiliation and managed to come out on top? Every day, we bring intense stories like this, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, the dilemmas we face between silence and truth, between acceptance and struggle. Each story is an emotional journey that makes us reflect on our own choices and the kind of person we want to be. We await you in the next episode, with another story that will stir your emotions and make you think. Until then, remember, your voice matters, your dignity matters, and it's never too late to choose the truth.